6 seconds. That is how long Representative Dana Okafor sat without speaking after Senator Cal Beaumont asked her the last question of the day. 6 seconds in front of a packed hearing room with every camera in the building pointed at her face. And when you understand what happened in the 5 hours before those 6 seconds, you will understand why she had nothing left to say. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining me tonight. I spent the better part of 2 decades working inside that building, first as committee staff, then on the other side of the days, and I want to tell you something before we start. Hearings like this one do not happen by accident. What you're about to hear was not a lucky moment. It was not a senator getting a hot hand on a good day. It was architecture. Somebody drew up a blueprint weeks in advance, laid a foundation nobody noticed, and then waited patiently for one specific person to walk through one specific door. Tonight, I'm going to walk you through that blueprint beam by beam, because by the end of this video, you will never watch a congressional hearing the same way again. Let me set the stage. Hart Senate Office Building, Room 216. A Tuesday morning in early spring, if you have never been inside Hart 216, picture a room built to make ordinary people feel small, high ceilings, marble accents, a curved dais that looks down on a lonely witness table the way a jury box looks down on a defendant's chair. On this particular morning, that room was packed to the fire code limit. Staffers lined the back wall 3 deep. Reporters were sitting on the floor along the side aisles because the press tables ran out of chairs an hour before the gavel. The reason for the crowd was a number: $260 million. That was the total congressional appropriations spread across 3 budget cycles for something called the American Neighbor Initiative, a federal program built to help newly arrived refugee families put down roots in mid-sized towns across the industrial Midwest. Housing help, job placement, English classes, the kind of program that sounds unimpeachable in a press release, except the Inspector General's office had just finished a 14-month forensic review of that program, and the review said something no press release could survive. Of the $260 million appropriated, auditors could verify the destination of only about $112 million. The rest, $148 million of taxpayer money, could not be traced to any service, any family, or any town. It had gone somewhere. Nobody could say where. And the House member who wrote the program, who carried it through committee, who defended it on every cable panel that would have her Representative Dana Okafor of Ohio, had volunteered to come across the Capitol and testify in its defense. She did not have to come. Nobody subpoenaed her. She walked into that room by choice, carrying a leather folder of prepared remarks, convinced she could win the day. Sitting in the center chair of the dais, waiting for her, was Senator Cal Beaumont of Tennessee. And here's the first thing you need to understand about Beaumont, because everything that follows flows from it. The man's entire public persona, the slow cadence, the country expressions, the reading glasses perched halfway down his nose, all of it is a fishing technique. Beaumont grew up bass fishing on Kentucky Lake, and he questions witnesses exactly the way he fishes. He lets the line drift. He gives you slack. He lets you swim wherever you want to swim for as long as you want to swim there. And the entire time, the hook is already set. You just haven't felt it yet. The gavel came down at 4 minutes past 10. Now, standard procedure says a chairman opens with housekeeping. Rules of the committee, order of questioning, courtesies to the ranking member. 5 minutes of oatmeal, nobody remembers. Beaumont skipped every bit of it. He pulled his microphone an inch closer, looked out at the gallery instead of down at his notes, and started talking about a place most people in that room had never heard of. There's a town in eastern Ohio, he said, called Marlow Creek, about 6,400 folks. Rail town once upon a time. These days, it's got 2 schools, 1 grocery store, 1 medical clinic, and a volunteer fire department that still does pancake breakfasts on Saturdays. He let the room picture it. Over the course of about a year and a half, Marlow Creek took in 900 new residents through the program we're here to discuss today. 900 people into a town of 6,400. Now, nobody in Washington called the town first to ask if the schools had room. Nobody called after, either. When the clinic's waiting list stretched to 11 weeks and the school district ran out of chairs before it ran out of children, the mayor of Marlow Creek wrote to the federal government 14 times over 2 years asking where the promised support money was. She kept copies of every letter. She never received a reply. Not one. Then he did something I have watched exactly 3 chairmen do in my entire career. He stopped talking, on purpose. For a solid 3 count, if you have never sat in a hearing room during intentional silence, I cannot fully describe the pressure of it. Television has a term for dead air. In that room, dead air has weight. You can feel it pressing on the back of your neck. When Beaumont finally spoke again, he gave the room its thesis. $260 million was supposed to make sure that story never happened. Today we're going to find out why it happened anyway. Understand the chess move here, because it is the foundation for everything else. Before a single question was asked, Beaumont had taken a $250 million abstraction, the kind of number that slides right off the human brain, and shrunk it down to one town, one clinic, one mayor, licking stamps on letters nobody answered. Every question he asked for the rest of the day would be standing on Marlow Creek's shoulders. Representative Okafor gave her opening statement, and I want to be fair to her, because she is genuinely skilled, and the first hour of this hearing proves it. Her statement was tight, controlled, and morally confident. She told the committee the American NAPER initiative had placed thousands of families into safe housing, that children who arrived speaking no English were now on honor rolls, that she had written this program, believed in this program, and would not sit quietly while it was, in her words, reduced to a spreadsheet by people who never met a single family it served. Strong opening, high ground secured, or so it appeared. Beaumont nodded along like a man agreeing with a sermon. Then he responded, and his answer drew the borders of the entire day. Representative, nobody up here is questioning whether those families deserved help. Not me, not anybody on this dais. The question in front of us is a lot narrower and a lot colder. Somebody was supposed to be keeping the books on the money meant to help them. We're here to find out whether anybody actually was. Compassion acknowledged, then set aside. The battlefield he chose was arithmetic, and you cannot filibuster arithmetic. The questioning began, and Beaumont started so gently that half the gallery probably wondered if they had overhyped the day. His first question was almost embarrassing in its simplicity. He asked her to describe in her own words what the program was built to do. Okafor answered beautifully. She had given this answer 100 times, and it showed resettlement services, language instruction, workforce pipelines, housing coordination, all delivered through trusted local partners. Fluent, polished, not a wasted syllable. Beaumont scribbled on a legal pad like a man taking notes at a seminar. Then, still not looking up, who actually ran things day to day, out in the towns? The local partner organizations, she explained. 41 of them, all vetted, all community-rooted, spread across 5 states. And who decided which towns received placements? The partner organizations made those calls, she said, based on capacity studies of each community. Capacity studies, Beaumont repeated, writing it down. All right, he asked one more. The money itself, the $260 million, who was responsible for confirming it was spent the way Congress wrote it? There was a hesitation. Blink and you missed it, maybe half a second. But I have watched thousands of hours of testimony, and half a second in that chair is a tell. She answered that financial reporting was handled by the partner organizations themselves, with periodic federal review layered on top. Beaumont set his pen down. He repeated her answer back the way a man repeats a phone number he suspects he heard wrong. So the organizations spending the money were also the organizations reporting on whether the money was spent properly. Okafor did not flinch. She was ready for this. That structure, she said, was standard across dozens of community-based federal programs, and she named 3 of them from memory, statute numbers included. It was an impressive display of preparation. And Beaumont, this is the part people miss when they watch the clip, Beaumont folded, held up both palms, said, "Fair enough," and moved right along. Half the gallery thought she had just won the exchange. She had not. The fisherman had simply let out more line. What came next looked like nothing at all, and it was the single most important 90 seconds of the entire hearing. Beaumont picked up a sheet of paper and started reading organization names off it in the bored tone of a substitute teacher taking attendance. The Great Lakes Welcome Council, that was a program partner, correct?
Yes.
The Ohio Valley Family Fund, yes. And an outfit called the Lakeshore Bridge Coalition, were they a partner as well? And right there, something changed in Okafor's posture. Not worry. The opposite of worry. She leaned toward her microphone with visible warmth and said yes, in fact, the Lakeshore Bridge Coalition was one of the initiative's standout performers. Their job readiness work in northern Ohio, she said, was a model she wished every partner had followed. Beaumont wrote the name down. He did not look up. He did not raise an eyebrow. He asked his next question, as though the answer had bored him. Hold on to that name, Lakeshore Bridge Coalition, she praised it, unprompted on the record, by name, at roughly 11 o'clock in the morning. Remember where the sun was in the sky when she said it, because that sentence was a landmine she buried under her own feet, and the fuse was 4 hours long. Around this point, one of Okafor's allies on the committee tried to throw her a rope. A senator 2 seats down leaned in and suggested the chairman confine his questions to the audit's formal findings. Beaumont did not even turn his head. I appreciate the counsel, he said, and that is precisely where we are headed. Then back to the witness with a question that had nothing to do with spreadsheets at all. In the 3 years the program operated, how many times had she personally, not her staff, not her district office, she herself stood in one of the towns receiving placements and spoken with the people living there? The pause this time was long enough for everybody to hear it. 2 seconds. 3. Under those lights, 3 seconds is a canyon. Her answer when it came was that a legislator's calendar is unforgiving, and that site inspection is properly the executive branch's job. I understand. Beaumont said softly and moved on as if the answer meant nothing. It meant everything. He was not gathering information. He already knew the answer before he asked. He was building a portrait, one brushstroke at a time, of an author who never once visited her own story. Then came the audit, and Beaumont handled the Inspector General's report the way a man handles evidence in a murder trial. No summarizing, no paraphrasing. Just the document itself, read aloud, slowly, so every number could sink its own teeth in. $260 million appropriated across 3 fiscal years. 112 million verifiably connected to actual services. 41 partner organizations funded. 9 of the 41 never submitted a single required progress report. Not late, not incomplete, never. 4 organizations legally dissolved while the program was still running, taking a combined $9.8 million in unreconciled balances with them into the void. He closed the report and looked at her over the top of his glasses. That leaves $148 million, representative, that this government cannot locate. To put that in kitchen table terms, that's better than $1 from every man, woman, and child in America, collected for a program where nobody can tell us what happened next. Now, if you think Dana Okafor sat there and absorbed that, you have not been paying attention to who she is. This is where the hearing became a genuine fight, and I want to give her rounds their full due, because the clip factories cut them out, and the clip factories are lying to you by omission. She hit back, and she hit back with real ammunition. Her first counterpunch was aimed at the committee itself. In the past 6 years, she noted, this subcommittee had convened 13 oversight hearings. 10 of the 13 had scrutinized programs serving immigrants, refugees, or low-income families. Not one had examined the defense contractor whose flagship aircraft program was $11 billion over budget. Not one had touched the crop insurance subsidies that overshoot their authorization every single year. 10 out of 13. Then she turned the number into a knife, so the committee will forgive me for asking whether today is about missing money or about who the money was spent on. The gallery went absolutely still. Not because the charge was cheap, because it wasn't. It was specific, it was countable, and countable accusations are the only kind that survive contact with a hearing room. For the first time all morning, Beaumont took a genuine beat before answering. And his answer is worth studying because he did the one thing weak chairmen never do. He conceded the point before neutralizing it. If she wanted to co-sponsor a hearing on defense cost overruns, he told her, his name would be the first signature on the request letter, and he meant it. Then he closed the exit she had opened. But today in this room, there is $148 million missing from a program with your name on the cover page. And I noticed that when I asked you about the money, you answered me with a question about my motives. I'd still like an answer about the money. Body blow traded for body blow. He had landed harder, but she was nowhere near finished. Her second move was the oldest and most reliable weapon in the witness table arsenal. She told a story, a real one told well. A woman named Halima, who arrived in Dayton with 2 sons and 40 English words, who cleaned hotel rooms on the morning shift and studied at a community center at night, whose 12-year-old translated at the pharmacy and the parent-teacher conference. 3 years later, Halima raised her right hand in a federal courthouse and became a citizen. Last November, she voted for the first time in her life. The room gave that story the silence it deserved. Even the people who came to see Okafor bleed sat with it. It was true, it was human, and it was moving. Beaumont let every word finish, then he answered in a voice that barely rose above the microphone. That's a beautiful story, and I don't doubt a word of it, but I've noticed something today, Representative. Every time I ask you about money, you hand me a family. And those families deserve better than being used as an answer to a question about $148 million missing dollars. Watch Okafor's face in the footage at that exact moment. Her jaw sets, because she understood right then that her 2 best conventional weapons, the bias charge and the human story, had both been fired, and the man across the dais was still standing there asking the same question he started with. Beaumont then called his first witness, and this is where the hearing left the realm of Washington abstraction for good. Mayor Ruth Calloway of Marlow Creek, Ohio, took the seat beside Okafor's table. 61 years old, 11 years as mayor, a woman who had clearly ironed her blazer that morning in a hotel room and had clearly never testified anywhere in her life. Her testimony did not sound like testimony. It sounded like a neighbor telling you the truth over a fence. 900 new residents in 18 months. No advance consultation. The town found out placements were coming when the first families arrived. No supplemental school funding. No clinic support. 14 letters to Washington, 0 replies, and then Mayor Calloway said the thing nobody on either side of the room saw coming, and it is the moral center of this entire story. The families themselves, she said, were wonderful. They showed up wanting work, wanting school, wanting to belong to the town. They weren't the problem, she told the committee. her voice level. They were dropped into a place that had nothing left to give them by a program that promised them everything and then drove away. My town got failed, and so did they. We got failed together. Beaumont leaned into his microphone and drew the circle closed with one quiet sentence. So this program managed to fail every single party it touched. The taxpayers who financed it, the town that absorbed it, and the families it existed to serve. Then Calloway delivered the detail that followed every viewer home that night. Marlow Creek's only medical clinic, the clinic, had shut its doors. Patient volume had tripled. The two physicians burned out and left, and the emergency support funding that was supposedly on its way never arrived. "We called for help for 2 years," she said, and her voice cracked exactly once on the word years. Nobody ever called back. The room did not stir. It did not murmur. It just sat there, holding that. Now, if the hearing had ended there, it would have been a bad day for Dana Okafor. What she did next is why it became a legendary one, because she refused to drown quietly, and for about 20 minutes, she genuinely turned the tide. She opened her own folder, and this time she was not telling stories. She was reading receipts. The original bill she authored, she reminded the committee, contained $170 million in dedicated community readiness funding, money earmarked, by name for towns exactly like Marlow Creek, school expansion grants, clinic capacity grants, first responder staffing, money designed to land in those towns before the first family ever did. And that entire funding title, she said, her voice hardening with every clause, was stripped out in Senate negotiations, deleted, by amendment, and I have the roll call in my hand. Then she read names, senators who voted to gut the readiness funding, and 2 of those names belonged to men sitting on the dais in front of her at that very moment. One of them suddenly found something fascinating to study on his notepad. "You removed the seawall," she said, "and now you've convened a hearing to express your astonishment at the flood. You cut the clinic money, you cut the school money, you cut the preparation money, and then you fly a mayor to Washington so she can describe the wreckage your own votes helped create." The gallery came alive for the first time all day. Her side of the room leaned forward. Reporters' pens moved in unison. This was no longer a witness absorbing punishment. This was a counteroffensive with documentary evidence behind it, and it was landing. And she still had one shell left in the chamber, the one aimed directly between Cal Beaumont's eyes. Since the committee was so interested in oversight structures today, she said she wanted to enter something into the record. 4 years earlier, Senator Beaumont had stood on the Senate floor and championed the Tennessee Rural Recovery Partnership, a federal grant program in his own state that routed money through local nonprofits which self-reported their own spending. The identical structure she noted that he had spent the entire morning treating as evidence of negligence. She read his own floor speech back to him, the part where he called the Tennessee model proof that local hands spend federal dollars best. She set the page down and looked straight up at the days. "So, which is it, Senator? Were you wrong then, or are you wrong now? I want you to sit inside that moment the way the room sat inside it." That was a clean, direct hit on the chairman's credibility, delivered from documentation, on live television. For a full 10 seconds, nobody in Heart 216 knew what was about to happen. Some of the smartest staffers in that building told me afterward that in those 10 seconds, they genuinely believed the hearing had flipped. Beaumont let the silence do its work, his silence this time spent deliberately. When he answered, his tone had not warmed or cooled by a single degree, and that flatness was its own message. The Tennessee program, he said, operated under an independent audit firm that reviewed every quarterly ledger, a requirement written into the authorizing statute. It carried mandatory unannounced site visits, also written into statute. And across its lifespan, its books balanced to the dollar every year, which is a matter of public record. The program in front of us today had no independent auditor, no mandatory site visits, and $148 million nobody can find. Those are not the same animal, Representative, and I suspect you'd know that if your office had read a certain letter, the room caught its breath at the word letter, and nobody knew why yet. Beaumont reached for a plain manila folder at the edge of his desk, a folder that had been sitting there, untouched, since the gavel, and every camera operator in the room instinctively tightened their shot. "But we'll come to the letter," he said. "First, the committee will hear from its next witness." The man who took the seat gave his name as Marcus Vail, 24 years in federal program administration. Career civil servant, hired under 3 different presidents of both parties, never a political appointee in his life. For 2 of the program's 3 years, he had served as deputy director of the American Neighbor Initiative. He spoke the way career auditors speak, no adjectives, no drama, sentences like ledger entries. 15 months into the program, Vail testified a routine internal reconciliation turned up patterns he described under oath as structural, not incidental. Multiple partner organizations were invoicing the government twice for identical services. Several were billing for programs whose existence he could not verify by any means available to him. Beaumont asked him to make it concrete, and Vale told the room about the day he drove, unannounced, to Northern Ohio to inspect a federally funded workforce training center, a facility for which one partner organization had billed the taxpayers $1.9 million. The organization was called the Lakeshore Bridge Coalition. If you were watching the live feed, this is the moment the chat froze. That name, the one Okafor had praised by name unprompted warmly, as a model partner 4 hours earlier, on the record in this same room. The landmine she buried at 11 in the morning went off at 3 in the afternoon, and Beaumont never had to touch it. He didn't glance at her. He didn't pause for effect. The fact detonated on its own. What did Mr. Vale find at the training center? A leased storefront in a half-vacant shopping plaza. Locked dark, through the window. Bare carpet, one folding table. A phone jack with no phone. No staff had ever been assigned there. No trainee had ever signed a roster. $1.9 million invoiced and paid for an empty room with a deadbolt. And was Lakeshore an isolated case? Vale's answer is the sentence that kept accountants awake that night. No, Senator. 7 of the 41 partner organizations, unrelated entities, in 3 different states, all processed their federal reimbursements through one single private accounting firm. That one firm touched $54 million of program money. When federal auditors finally went looking for it last year, the firm's office was vacant, its business registration dissolved, its managing partner living abroad, and its client records gone. Not sealed, not subpoenaed. Gone. $54 million. One firm, no records, no forwarding address. Were you able to determine where that money ended up, Mr. Vale? No, sir. That's why I wrote the letter, and there it was. Vale testified that after his internal report sat unanswered for 60 days, he did the thing career officials almost never do. He compiled his evidence, wrote a formal warning that the program was hemorrhaging money into unverifiable channels, and mailed it, certified signature required, to every member of Congress whose name appeared on the authorizing legislation. 5 recipients. Beaumont asked him to read the recipient list into the record. 3 names the public had never heard. The 4th name was Representative Dana Okafor. The temperature of the questioning changed in the space of one breath. The drawl remained, but the slack in the line was gone. Did her office receive Mr. Vale's letter? Okafor chose each word like a person crossing ice. Her office, she said, processes an enormous volume of correspondence. The letter would have been routed through legislative staff under standard procedure. And what did her office do with it? 4 seconds of silence, you can count them on the tape. Her staff, she finally said, referred the matter to the appropriate oversight body. Which body? She would need to consult her office records to answer precisely. Beaumont took off nothing, added nothing, just laid the sentence down like a slab of granite. Ma'am, a federal official sent you a certified letter telling you in writing that money was disappearing from a program that carries your name. And your testimony today, in front of the American people, is that you can't recall what was done about it. Then he closed the loop that turned an oversight failure into something the whole country could feel in its chest. After that letter arrived, after she was formally warned, did she continue to promote the program publicly? She didn't answer at first, because the record answered for her. In the 14 months between Vale's certified letter and the Inspector General's report, she had delivered 2 floor speeches celebrating the initiative, headlined a ribbon cutting at a partner facility, and told a national morning show the program was, quote, working exactly as designed. Yes, she said at last quietly, because I believed in what it was built to do. So, after a federal official warned you it was failing, Beaumont said, you kept telling the country it was succeeding. Cornered, she reached one final time for the only door she had left, the families, the mission, the danger of judging a humanitarian program by one official's letter. And for the first and only time in 5 hours, Beaumont raised his hand and stopped a witness mid-sentence.
Ma'am.
The word filled the room without rising. This is now the 2nd time today I've asked you about money and been answered with a family. I have honored those families in this room, repeatedly, and I will keep honoring them. But I'm asking about a certified letter that told you their money was being stolen, and I would be obliged to get a direct answer. The compassion pivot, used once, forgiven, used twice, named was dead as a tactic. Everyone watching could now see it for what it had become. Not an argument, but an exit, and the exit was sealed. Beaumont lifted Vale's letter and read a single sentence from it aloud. Absent immediate corrective oversight, I believe substantial public funds will be unrecoverable. He set it down with the care of a man handling something sharp. That warning was dated 14 months before the audit. In those 14 months, while it sat in a filing cabinet, another $81 million went out the door. Then came the summation, and I want you to notice what it was made of. No adjectives, no outrage, just her own answers returned to her in the order she gave them, each one a door clicking shut. She had testified the program was designed to prepare communities, and Marlow Creek learned it was a host town when the first van arrived. She had testified oversight belonged to the local partners, and those partners billed the treasury for empty storefronts while routing $54 million through a firm that evaporated. She had named Lakeshore Bridge a model partner, and the model partner charged $1.9 million for a locked room with a folding table. She had testified her role was purely legislative, and a certified letter with her name on the envelope warned her the money was vanishing, and she could not tell the committee what she did about it. And in the 14 months after that warning, she found time for 2 floor speeches and a ribbon cutting. You had time for the podium, Representative. The record will have to speak to whether you had time for the ledger. He paused there, and then he said the sentence that everything else had been scaffolding for. You've blamed the Senate for the funding cuts, and on that point you're right, and I've said so. You've blamed the agencies. You've blamed the volume of your mail. Somewhere in all of that blame, 260 million real dollars were spent, and 148 million of them are gone. At what point does the accounting stop being everyone else's job and start being yours? She did not answer. There was no answer that survived contact with the previous 5 hours. Beaumont removed his reading glasses, folded them, and set them on the desk with a small wooden click that the microphones caught perfectly. The room went still in a way rooms almost never do. I have one question left, Representative, and then we're done. And he asked it, 5 words, no preamble, no citation, no setup. The simplest question asked all day, and the only one that 5 hours of testimony had made impossible to answer. Who counted the money, Representative? What followed was not TV silence. TV silence is manufactured. A director counting beats. This was the real thing, a packed federal hearing room where every person present already knew the answer was nobody, and not one of them wanted to be the person who said it out loud. 6 seconds. Watch the tape and count them. When Dana Okafor finally spoke, her voice came out lower than anything she had said all day, and her prepared remarks sat untouched in the leather folder in front of her. She did not reach for them. The oversight framework, she said, did not deliver what the public was owed. I hear that. And I take it with me. It was not a confession. It was not an apology. It was something audiences find harder to watch than either a public official standing in the gap between what she promised and what she delivered, measuring the distance out loud. There was no villain's smirk and no tearful breakdown. There was just a person discovering, in front of a live national audience, that believing in something with your whole heart is not the same as making sure it works. And Beaumont, this is the detail that made even his critics tip their caps, did not spike the football. No glance to his colleagues, no smile for the cameras. He thanked her formally and by name for appearing without a subpoena and noted for the record that she had come voluntarily. Then he looked into the center camera and closed the day. The people of this country deserve better than a $250 million program that nobody was watching. They deserve better than being told the machine is running fine while the parts are falling off it on the highway. The families who crossed an ocean for a better life deserved better. The town that opened its doors to them deserved better. And every taxpayer who ever assumed reasonably that someone somewhere was minding the books deserved better than what this committee heard today. The gavel fell at 3:47 in the afternoon. The clip of those final 5 words ran wall to wall for 3 days. The commentary machine did what it does. Panels, predictions, sanitized statements from every office within a mile of the Capitol. 3 new reviews announced by Friday. You know the ritual. But I want to end this broadcast somewhere else. I want to end it in Marlow Creek, Ohio, where Mayor Ruth Calloway flew home coach, drove herself back from the airport and turned on the evening news to watch herself testify. When it ended, she switched off the set and stood at her kitchen window for a long while, looking out at a town she had held together for 3 years with stubbornness and borrowed time. Because here's the part no panel discussed. The clinic on Main Street is still dark, the 14 letters are still unanswered, and somewhere in the deep machinery of the federal budget, $148 million sits in a column labeled unverified, money that belonged to every American who ever assumed, even for a moment, that somebody in that marble city was paying attention. Nobody was. And now, because of 5 hours in Heart 216, the entire country knows it. If this breakdown showed you something about how power actually works in that building, get subscribed, because there is always another hearing, and now you know how to watch one. Tell me in the comments, at what point did you realize the trap had already closed? For me, it was a name spoken warmly at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'll see you in the next one. Host town when the first van arrived. She had testified oversight belonged to the local partners, and those partners billed the treasury for empty storefronts while routing $54 million through a firm that evaporated. She had named Lakeshore Bridge a model partner, and the model partner charged $1.9 million for a locked room with a folding table. She had testified her role was purely legislative, and a certified letter with her name on the envelope warned her the money was vanishing, and she could not tell the committee what she did about it. And in the 14 months after that warning, she found time for 2 floor speeches and a ribbon cutting. You had time for the podium, representative. The record will have to speak to whether you had time for the ledger. He paused there, and then he said the sentence that everything else had been scaffolding for. You've blamed the Senate for the funding cuts, and on that point you're right, and I've said so. You've blamed the agencies. You've blamed the volume of your mail. Somewhere in all of that blame, 260 million real dollars were spent, and 148 million of them are gone. At what point does the accounting stop being everyone else's job and start being yours? She did not answer. There was no answer that survived contact with the previous 5 hours. Beaumont removed his reading glasses, folded them, and set them on the desk with a small wooden click that the microphones caught perfectly. The room went still in a way rooms almost never do. I have one question left, Representative, and then we're done. And he asked it, 5 words, no preamble, no citation, no setup. The simplest question asked all day, and the only one that 5 hours of testimony had made impossible to answer. Who counted the money, Representative? What followed was not TV silence. TV silence is manufactured. A director counting beats. This was the real thing, a packed federal hearing room where every person present already knew the answer was nobody, and not one of them wanted to be the person who said it out loud. 6 seconds. Watch the tape and count them. When Dana Okafor finally spoke, her voice came out lower than anything she had said all day, and her prepared remarks sat untouched in the leather folder in front of her. She did not reach for them. The oversight framework, she said, did not deliver what the public was owed. I hear that. And I take it with me. It was not a confession. It was not an apology. It was something audiences find harder to watch than either a public official standing in the gap between what she promised and what she delivered, measuring the distance out loud. There was no villain's smirk and no tearful breakdown. There was just a person discovering, in front of a live national audience, that believing in something with your whole heart is not the same as making sure it works. And Beaumont, this is the detail that made even his critics tip their caps, did not spike the football. No glance to his colleagues, no smile for the cameras. He thanked her formally and by name for appearing without a subpoena and noted for the record that she had come voluntarily. Then he looked into the center camera and closed the day. The people of this country deserve better than a $250 million program that nobody was watching. They deserve better than being told the machine is running fine while the parts are falling off it on the highway. The families who crossed an ocean for a better life deserved better. The town that opened its doors to them deserved better. And every taxpayer who ever assumed reasonably that someone somewhere was minding the books deserved better than what this committee heard today. The gavel fell at 3:47 in the afternoon. The clip of those final 5 words ran wall to wall for 3 days. The commentary machine did what it does. Panels, predictions, sanitized statements from every office within a mile of the Capitol. 3 new reviews announced by Friday. You know the ritual. But I want to end this broadcast somewhere else. I want to end it in Marlow Creek, Ohio, where Mayor Ruth Calloway flew home coach, drove herself back from the airport and turned on the evening news to watch herself testify. When it ended, she switched off the set and stood at her kitchen window for a long while, looking out at a town she had held together for 3 years with stubbornness and borrowed time. Because here's the part no panel discussed. The clinic on Main Street is still dark. The 14 letters are still unanswered. And somewhere in the deep machinery of the federal budget, $148 million sits in a column labeled unverified, money that belonged to every American who ever assumed, even for a moment, that somebody in that marble city was paying attention. Nobody was. And now, because of 5 hours in Heart 216, the entire country knows it. If this breakdown showed you something about how power actually works in that building, get subscribed, because there is always another hearing, and now you know how to watch one. Tell me in the comments, at what point did you realize the trap had already closed? For me, it was a name spoken warmly at 11 o'clock in the morning. I'll see you in the next one.